Well, welcome to part 2 of our marriage conversation. We hope that you learned a lot from episode 1 of this marriage journey that we're on, and we're excited to dive into some more conversation today.
So one of the questions was, what does it practically look like to submit to your husband? And so just wanted to make sure both of you, or is there anything else you'd want to add to that? Because we've covered a lot of things related to that. You know, are there any other practical tips that you'd say of how do you submit?
Well, I think, Robyn mentioned it too, and it was something I was going to bring up also, but we went to that marriage conference, you and I, when we saw David and Tracy Holland, and they spoke about when they had decisions that they needed to make, so kind of like financial or whatever it is, that they would kind of go together, and then if she had a different opinion, she would always submit to him in those big decisions. So I think I've really looked at that as well in our relationship. If there's something kind of big that comes up, you're giving me looks. Oh boy. Have I been wanting to overrule some of your big decisions?
All I got to say is vroom, vroom.
Oh. All right, Jesus. You can come tonight. All right, Lord. We won't get into that because I got a lot of things to talk about on that front. So we better bring in Kevin tonight.
On the submission piece too, I just think back to when the Roman officer comes to Jesus for healing in his home, right? And he talks about, I understand your authority, he says to Jesus, for I too am a man who walks under authority and have authority over soldiers who serve under me. And the reality is, even if you were just a single person, the Lord has entrusted you with assets, your income, what you have in front of you, what you have available to you. You being a good steward of those assets, of just in the natural, is something you need to be a leader and think leaderly thoughts and behaviors around, let alone children or family or nieces and nephews or, you name it. And we all serve under authority and are servants too. Right. So you can be a leader, but we're all servants too. You're right.
Yeah. So then the last one is, I was wondering if you guys could speak to roles in a marriage, like God's roles for man and woman, etc.
I thought about that and I was looking at the scriptures and, I think in Ephesians, I was reading through it and it's like he doesn't lay out specific roles. This is the husband's called to love his wife. The wife's called to honor and respect her husband. And he talks a lot about what does love look like in that relationship. I think the Lord's left a lot of room as far as specific roles. And what I think is beautiful is nowadays on the culture, we are so much more flexible. There are some men that are like amazing at home with their children. And it's like they're clearly called to be home with them. And the wife's, out making money and providing for the family that way. And I think, there's a lot of room. I don't personally think that all women are called to be the main child rearer. And, I don't believe that there's like scriptural basis for that. I think depending on personalities and gifts and, all of that, it can vary so much. And you really need to look at and this again, when you're getting married, be thoughtful about that. What are your strengths and calls and giftings, and how does that blend with the other person's? And what will that look like in child rearing? And how will that serve our children best and our family best? And, sometimes we need to be flexible in what does that look like? We might not fit in a box, What were you going to say, Steve? Mm-hmm. Oh, it looked like you were getting ready to say something.
I was just looking back at Ephesians, but
yeah.
No, I think, that's a good point. And even in that situation, the roles are, different than the traditional, but doesn't mean that the leadership changes necessarily, right?
Yep.
Just because you're home doesn't mean you aren't the leader and still have to be accountable because God's called you to be accountable.
Yep.
Right? More than ever, you have to be equally yoked and in relationship, right?
Mm-hmm. I tend to see patterns, but I don't think they're absolutes. I tend to see mothers being maybe more nurturing and more in tune with the maybe emotional needs of children, but that's a generalization. And I don't think that that's like a role that the mom needs to play by any means, or, I don't know.
Right.
And what do you think, Gary? You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the answer of both parties. Your role is to be Christ. Like, that's what it really comes down to, is it's not a firm, men, you're supposed to do this, 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 and this. No, it's we're both meant to be showing Christ's love and his behavior. And so if you saw Christ do it, that's your role. And if you didn't see Christ do it, that's not your role. And that goes both ways. And like Steve said, the man is supposed to be the leader. But like you said earlier, Robyn, we're all Christ's bride. So the man submits. So no matter where you are, your role is to be Christ's love. And so if you see something going on that's not what Christ would do in your own behavior, change it. And don't get fixated on roles and types and like, hey, they're not doing their checklist, because at the end of the day, it's Jesus did so many amazing things, and he played so many different quote unquote roles. He was kind and nurturing to children. Like, he literally fought people off basically verbally when they're like, hey, kick the kids out. And he's like, no, let them get here. And by the way, let me tell you how you guys all need to be like kids, right? But then he was also firm, and he flipped tables when he needed to because something wrong was happening.
Maybe I need to start doing that.
If you're doing it because you're called and led, and you're doing it in love, But you see, the point is, it's not about a checklist of a specific role that we're each supposed to fill, other than the role of being like Christ. Right? And if you're doing that, the rest is going to fall into place.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think you need to have just communication. How much does good communication go in a marriage? I mean, it is a saving grace. So if you're talking, and sometimes it happens naturally, like you don't even have the discussion, Steve takes care of the lawn and the outside of the house and all this stuff, right? That's like his natural domain that I know nothing about. And so it just naturally goes to that. And I tend to like try to keep the inside of the house organized and cleaned and whatever. That just naturally happened. Sometimes you need to actually talk about those things and figure out like, okay, this makes sense. Like, all of this stuff needs to be done in our lives, and things that need to be managed. Who's better at this? And and do we both need to own this one and work on it together? Or, because I bet it looks different in every marriage and every family. And it's totally dependent on the individual personality and experience and likes and dislikes, and maybe even, do they have time in their life right now? What's their schedule like, or whatever, And so just communicating about that, and so that nobody is secretly building up resentment for unspoken rules, things that are happening, and you're kind of like, why is this always my job? And you've never actually had a conversation about it.
Right.
You don't want that to happen either.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a natural delineation of labor and duties is one of the most efficient ways to get things done. Because if everyone's doing everything, it's such an inefficient use of time, because everyone's trying to pay attention to everything, and it's not, you can just ignore things. But if you've got things you're on point for, natural delineation of labor, I think, helps get those things done in the most efficient way possible, given the limited time we have for everything in our world right now, which is much self-imposed.
And if you're feeling like, I really wish my husband would help out with the kids and giving them baths at night and would be more involved with them and whatever, I'm just giving an example. It's just coming up. Okay, don't carry that around. Like, sit down and talk to your husband about that. And the heart of it should be, well, why do you care so much? Is it because you really want your children and your husband to bond, and you're concerned that they're not getting enough time together, and that would be a great way for that to happen? Or is it you're sick and tired of doing bath time, because one's Christ and one's not, and one's going to be received and one's not, And so what's the heart posture and the motive behind it? Is there any resentment, bitterness, and how can you have a productive conversation? And where is your heart,
One thing that, since we're on the topic of marriage, that's not a question or anything like that, but it's just something practical that Gary and I did for many years. But at the end of the day, we would do this prayer journal together, and we would write out things or people that we were praying for or believing for. And it was like a great bonding thing for us to really just press into the Lord together and just see what he was putting on our hearts collectively. And I'm bringing this up because I think one of the most practical things and the biggest thing, I mean, we're telling you this whole episode essentially is to look to Christ, be his example. But that means like the 3-strand cord, right? Bringing God into everything that you're doing. So at night, taking time to pray together before you go to bed or waking up, it doesn't need to be something that it's not. You can start simply, and even if you're looking at your relationship and being like, yeah, he's not here or she's not there, like just start simply by reading a devotional together, like something in the morning where you're putting Christ first. Like you don't have to sit there for like an hour or 2 hours together, like pressing into the Lord. Like that's great if you can, but just like taking that time to just like submit to the Lord together to start your day, I think it'd be very powerful. And then just like ending the day, just like praying for anything that God puts on your heart. I see other couples do that, and I think it's just so powerful to see the things that they're praying for and believing for. And fruit comes from that. Like that's never going to return void. Like those minutes that you spend with the Lord and with your partner, they're not going to return void. And so I think that's just like my biggest kind of homework, I guess, that I would say to any married couple right now is just take even a few minutes. Because if you're not doing anything, 5-10 minutes is better than nothing.
Right.
So it's a great way to start.
Yeah, it starts and it builds. And to avoid resentment from coming in, don't one person make up the decision on how you're going to do that and just sort of throw it in the room, because then you get the immediate pushback. I think it's like, what's the motive for wanting your spouse to help take care of the bath time for children? Is it because you just are tired of it, or you see that as a really good opportunity? And, how could you help make that happen? Right? Because that may mean something else has to come off their list that you might have to pick up. So it may not lighten your load. It may just change it. But because the value of what that's going to bring is there, you're willing to do that too. Right? So I think bringing that in is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just trying to get like practical mindset things that people, if they're in a relationship and they have nothing Christ-like going on, something to like unify them together, to just like bring the Lord in, because it's so important. Like we are nothing without God. Absolutely nothing. We have nothing. We are nothing without him, So that's something.
Start praying about that. Lay some prayer foundation ahead of that too, right? Because if you have nothing going on, well, what does God want you to do that would bring that in, that would work for you together, that would be valuable? Because that might be prayer time at a particular point in the day on the phone, but it's not with distraction, etc. It's for a reason. But figure out what that is. But ask him to show you what that looks like together, each of you.
Or maybe you start reading a book together.
Yeah.
Out loud to one another. And on a certain marriage topic or whatever.
As long as it doesn't speak to roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
I found that super helpful. It was like a non-threatening way for things to come up. That was like, hey, what do you think about that? And bring up dialogue and help us, really think about questions that maybe we'd never ask, or bring it up in a way that it's like, well, the book brought it up, I didn't, and so let's talk about that. And it helped us grow and brought us closer together. Right.
And I think from my perspective, and you could answer this as well, Gary, as a man, there's, again, generalizations, right? One of the generalizations is that women tend to build relationships face to face, and men tend to build relationships side by side, doing things. Mm-hmm. And women build it in connection and conversation and in relationship. That's a huge generalization. However, I would say the process to me felt like reading through a book and then talking about topics that were in that chapter, that if we were sitting down over the table at dinner and just bringing those up, probably would be awkward, hard to answer, would feel a little off-putting, might not feel like doing something, but it's kind of like doing something together too, right? So from the men's perspective, to me, it felt like we were kind of doing something together.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it was sort of a natural way to bond and connect versus you just staring me down and saying, what do you think about all those things that are going on? And which ones? But if we just read through a chapter and there's some talking points at the end or whatever, it's just really great spark for conversation, and it feels a little less threatening and it feels a little more like doing something together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely agree. And I'd say to that, make sure that you're spending your alone time with God first.
Yes.
Because, again, if you try to come at the marriage without your relationship being in the right place, so if you're starting the morning off going, okay, how do I get it so that we're reading a book together, but you haven't spent your time with God to actually get your heart in the right place, start there first, then build into it, because then you're going to actually see fruit if you're not.
100%.
And the last thing I'd say to it, because this hit me as we were talking, is pride is the silent killer in the marriage, because everything we've talked about inevitably comes back to the whole me and being prideful about what you want. And so a lot of times, if you want to see a breakthrough in your marriage, you got to humble yourself and you got to swallow your pride and do something you don't think you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what Christ is calling you to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting you said that, because I was seeing that too. I was thinking so often, I mean, it's come up a lot tonight, but so often we do look to that person and be like, they're not leading. Yeah, but like, what are you doing? Are there things that you're struggling with? So even going to your spouse and saying like, hey, I'm sorry. I've been realizing I haven't been doing this. Like, I haven't been going to God for this. And this is an area, just like being humble with your spouse, being open about the things that God is convicting you on, you know, and just like open up those conversations, because when you're humble and you're saying like, hey, I'm struggling with this in my life, and it's not putting blame on them, then they can kind of like help talk you through that and pray through that with you. You could even be like, hey, I need prayer for this. Like, can you support me in prayer for this? Like, that's a great way to bring your spouse in as well.
And being open for your spouse to bring something up that way. Not throwing it back in their face, not, you know, not discounting it either. You don't need to overplay it, but you should receive it, right? And meet them there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think, you mentioned it. So pride, you said resentment earlier. You know, me, myself, and I, if that's the first word at the start of your sentence about a topic, I'm not getting whatever, fill in the blanks. Those are all great signs that we have our eyes off of Jesus. We're not in the right place. So I think there are some things we should always watch for, because if we're feeling resentment about something, or the minute somebody notices it and kindly, graciously brings it up, that, you know, is pride an issue on this one for you? Because if it is, let's pray about that. Yeah. But those are all really good warning signs that we've got it wrong. We're looking in and not looking up.
Yeah. And ladies, if your man starts talking and he pauses, give him like 30 seconds of silence before you jump in. Because we men, we talk, and then we get to a point with our idea, and then we stop to figure out the phrasing in our head. How should I say this? What should I say next? How am I going to present this in the right way? And if you don't give us the time to finish that, we never finish a thought. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've noticed, not just in marriage, but I saw it just randomly on social media recently, a comment about that. I was like, that's actually so true. When we're having a conversation, more times than not, I'll say, hey, can you please just pause and let me finish? Because I didn't finish my thought. And if I can't get my one thought out, usually I'm building to a point. And if you stop me before I get to the point, I never get to the end of it. And then we never have that communication that you're talking about. So just remember, people communicate differently.
Yeah, sometimes that's called stoicism. And sometimes we never finish a thought, but that's another story.
Some people also call it children. And I'm speaking, and then I'm hearing, Mom. I'm like, can I just get a thought out?
Well, and
completely agree. I'm just saying.
And that's a really great point. It's a really great point. And I would... We touched on it earlier. You mentioned it again now, the children factor. I don't know when this fits into a conversation, but do we have our children in the right place in our marriage relationship, or don't we?
Yeah.
Because if your spouse isn't the first person that matters when someone arrives home from work, and we go right to the children, or we let the children take that space rather than saying, you'll get your chance. I'm now going to say, I'm going to hi to my husband or my wife. And just making that a conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Not that anyone's going to be perfect. Don't take condemnation or judgment, but it's another great sign of who am I putting first in my marriage and in our family?
Yep.
Is my marriage first, or are our children who are temporary visitors in our home and in our lives?
Yeah.
Because our goal is to train them up so they can be successful, right?
Yeah.
Not that we don't want them part of our lives forever,
Right.
right? That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But they are temporary visitors, and we're supposed to train them up. And our spouse should be our partner that we're going to be with till we're not here anymore, right? So that's really got to be job number one.
That's huge.
On the earth,
Huge.
right?
Yeah.
The other thing that kept coming to mind that I think would be interesting for people maybe to spend some time with is learning about personalities. We had gone to a homeschooling conference and they talked about like 4 main personality types. And I was thinking about it in the context of our discussion today. There's talker, that one that just, they talk even when they shouldn't be talking, and they just like, that's how they express themselves. They love to talk about everything, and they're just very social. And then there's the leader. They naturally are gifted in leading. And then there's the thinker, the person who's, overanalyzing, and you might not, it might take them a while to kind of get their thoughts together. They're going to be very, specific and exact in what they're going to say. And they've thought about it a long time before it finally comes out of their mouth. And then there's the peacemaker. And they're going to do whatever it takes to keep the peace. And Steve's a natural leader. Like, that's a strong personality trait for him. So in our marriage, it fit well. And I'm a peacemaker. So it's easy for us to fall into those roles of me kind of submitting. I'm trying to make everything happy and peaceful. And he is a natural leader. For you, Monique, I see you as a talker leader, kind of between the two. And Gary, you're a peacemaker thinker. Mm-hmm. And so that could be challenging, right? Because the gender roles are flip-flopped. And so you naturally want to take off and get things done, make decisions, and you're chatty and everything you're thinking's coming out of your mouth. And then Gary is trying to really thoughtfully think through every decision and is not going to just say whatever's coming to his mind because he wants it to be perfect. And he wants to keep the peace, And so you guys have to be aware of that. Like, those are our personality types. And so this is how it's going to show up. And so I need to be aware of, like, what are my strengths in my personality, but what can be my downfalls? And my spouse, the beautiful part is we tend to marry our opposites because they balance each other out. But we need to also then recognize, like, ooh, this is my spouse. He's a thinker. So I better give him room. And because I know he's probably been chewing on something for quite a long time, and he's got the perfect plan because he's thought about 18 different versions of the plan before he's going to bring me the final one that he came to, So I better give him time and space and realize he's also very carefully weighing how I'm going to react and, like all these different things and realizing that, right? And then so it is interesting. And sometimes when you spend time learning about those, you start to see people and their strengths and like, oh, okay. So this is how we're going to play together. In some ways we're going to rub. In some ways we're going to actually help each other. And so let's celebrate those, but also get them in the room so we can realize, this is where the talker is showing up and I need to pull that back. And this is where I need to give Gary room. But Gary, I know you've got those beautiful thoughts. Bring them out.
Well, and then giving him time to do that, right?
Yeah. And give him time. Yeah.
And I didn't bring it up earlier, but it's a phrase I heard years ago that while the man may be the head of the household, the wife is the neck that turns the head. Mm-hmm. And so, there are times where I'm checking with Robyn and she's kind of wanting to keep the peace, and she's also a really great director, and she sees all the things and she knows what's going on. And sometimes I don't ask. Sometimes I do ask. And the reason I'm asking is because she's going to direct me towards where we need to be going at the moment because she's got thoughts on things. I don't mind taking the lead on something, but I want it to be in sync with her. Otherwise, I'm going to go take the lead on something that I want to go do or I feel like needs to get done or something that's been barking on my list for a very long time. Yeah. And she's thinking, why are you doing that, right? And it's
Yeah,
because
like
it's been on
your
my
art
list.
show, Gary, is tomorrow. Why are you, like mowing the lawn or whatever? Like sometimes that's vital and important, but like if there's like a pressing deadline for the next day and you're thinking about something else, it's like keeping them like, hey, let's keep grounded here. Let's make sure we're doing the stuff for tomorrow. Some things can wait, and yeah.
Right. Well, and then being comfortable asking the question, because you realize you might both be thinking of things in different ways.
Yeah.
Gary's thinking it's going to rain for the next 7 days. Our
Yeah,
lawn
right.
is a hayfield.
Yeah.
It needs to be cut down. I realize that's a priority and I want to be up late working on that, but I have to get out there or it's going to look like a hayfield.
Yeah.
Right? Or whatever. Right. And so I think it's just being aware that those differences occur, but long term, you want to be together because you want to, have all of your efforts being successful and really efficient as much as you can. And that's just a perfect goal, but it's almost never achieved, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
Human flesh.
I want to get back to what you brought up because that's kind of funny. That's something that Gary and I wanted to talk about in our testimony, but I knew that probably little pieces would probably be brought up tonight. But one of the first things that was kind of traumatic in our relationship was there was a day that we were spending together, and this was when we were probably pretty early in our relationship. I think that we dated, was it like 9 months or something before we got married? Or like a year. I think it was like 11 months from starting to date to like getting married. And within like the first like 2 months, I asked him if he loved me, and he said he didn't know. And so in my head, I was thinking like, what in the heck? What do you mean you don't know? Like you're kissing me all the time. You're acting like you love me. You want to spend all this time with me, spending hours on the phone and all of this stuff. And so it really hurt me because, again, like I'm a talker, right? And so I'm like, I love you, Gary. Like we're doing all these things that make me feel like we're in love, And so I was thinking about it driving here today, and I was like, I want to reclaim that moment and hopefully help other people to realize that people do think about things differently, and that he did love me, but he wanted to be like absolutely sure that when those words came out, like this was like marriage for him. Saying I love you meant like I'm going to marry you. So he wanted to be absolutely sure that when he said I love you, like that was his essential commitment to me, like I'm going to marry you. Like he wasn't going to use those words with just anyone. And he wanted to make sure that he was not leading me down a path. So, I've like come to like reclaim that, to be like, that happened. It caused me a lot of pain because I was just so angry. I was like, what do you mean you don't love me? And it just like caused this like chaos in my mind because like I am a talker, and I'm like, man, you're kissing me. You're like doing all this stuff.
It caused
really
me a lot of
like,
pain too.
Yeah, of course it did. Of course it did. And then later on,
Not all
when
self-inflicted.
later on when things came up, like I went back to that because I took it as like he's not trustworthy, like he's not being honest with his intentions, and it's like that's not it. He just like thinks about things in a different way. And so I wanted to bring that up too, to just encourage people that like everyone's coming into a marriage relationship with different past, right? Different parents, different siblings, like all kinds of different information that we've developed for however long until you got married. And then you're going into this relationship with just like a totally different bag, and so you have to like learn about them. And we were very new in our relationship at that point. So
from early in the relationship, when you didn't understand each other well, you might still not understand each other well.
Well, and
I
wouldn't say that.
No, I'm saying other people
Oh,
might
yeah,
not know each other well.
Yeah, I was going to say,
some people,
well, we're 17 years in. I'm like, I think that.
Some people could be married 20 years and they still have not developed their relationship, or
some people 50.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone comes into these relationships with what we saw in our homes growing up. And we have our own perceptions, rightly and wrongly, our own misconceptions, right and wrong, about what normal looks like. And normal is really just a setting on the washing machine. That's all it is. And so everybody coming into a marriage has a different perspective. And you have to acknowledge them, learn about them, not right or wrong. There's things about them you say, I'd love to not repeat this in my life. But the reality is, left unchecked, and not aware of it, it'll probably manifest itself. So I think just like being consciously aware of that all throughout your marriage and your life, realizing what may be coming up that is like, this goes back to some point. And I saw this with my parents, or I saw this thing, and I'm like, you know, why is that showing up here? I didn't like it then. It didn't look healthy then. I thought about it not being healthy along the way, and now here it is, right? So we're all human becomings, and I think just being aware of that and giving ourselves grace in that space is so important. It's super hard when the stakes are high and the stress is high and the resentment's high and all that. But boy, reflecting in a constructive way on that is so important.
Yeah, and taking off expectations. I realized something that I did was my dad is completely a different person than Gary, and I'm so much more like my dad, and so very task-oriented, driven, you know, wants to do all the things, right? And Gary, he's way more nurturing. He's way more present, you know, in our home. Like, he's not outside power washing at 10 o'clock at night like my dad was. He's in there doing bedtime with my daughter. And so I used to think, like, Gary, he was just going to do all this stuff, like power wash and, like, you know, just make everything like pristine and perfect all the time, just like working for hours, you know, out there. But like, that would not be for me. Like that would not be a fit for me. You know, I thought that that's what I wanted, right? But it's just like, I have what I need, you know? And so it's just like really interesting how we can have those expectations for almost a superhuman of doing all of these things. And it's just like, that ain't it.
Right.
know?
And the negatives too, right? You saw something negative in one of your parents and you're like, you know, you're deathly afraid of seeing that. And so you're just playing this constant game of defense to make sure it doesn't show up when it may have no other reason to show up at all. But you're hypersensitive and you're being defensive to make sure it doesn't appear when it really won't, because it's not in your spouse or whatever, or, you know?
Yeah. I would just encourage people too, that it doesn't mean that you're a failure if you go try to find help.
For sure.
You know,
yeah.
I think therapy is an amazing
Yes.
thing. And if you can find a really good Christian therapist, I really love Kevin Shippers. He's amazing.
He's all right. I'm just kidding. I love him. Everyone who hears this and has heard me talk about him is like, oh, she won't shut up about him. So
Yeah. So he's that
I'll cut
truth
you off.
moment.
no, don't.
When you say he's okay.
Yeah, no, don't.
He's wonderful. And if you're at a place where you think you could work on anything and you just need help, maybe it's just communication needs work or whatever, you know, then find somebody, because sometimes it's so much easier when you have somebody else outside looking in that can really help see what's going on and how can we help navigate healing for both people. And it can be such a beautiful thing and really help you rapidly progress in the maturity of your marriage and get you in a totally different place. And some people, I feel like, have a hard time, or maybe they don't want to spend the money on that. And I would say, what else is more important really than your marriage, other than your relationship with the Lord? And so I think you need to invest.
Yes.
in
I
it.
was just going to say
If
that,
you're
because I can
gonna-
already hear people seeing the money signs and then they're
For
like,
sure.
oh, I'm worried about the money.
Yeah.
But
Are
it's,
you going to go on vacation?
yeah.
Do you know what a divorce is going to cost you?
Yeah.
Right.
I can give you a little rundown, but you won't go there, unfortunately. And I was talking to Kevin about this last week, and so I think as a word of advice for people when they're thinking about trying to find someone to help them, obviously they need to be a Christian, and that's not just in name only, but also understand what it is that they believe they're bringing to you. Because one of the things that I've found as we've had conversations with Kevin and been engaged with him, his intention in his heart is to help bring you traction and tools that are practical and
Right.
real, that on day one, and you shouldn't be going, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, someone may have needs, so I caveat that. But if you're not on an extreme end, you shouldn't be going to Kevin for 7 years.
Right.
You should be able to go to Kevin for a season
Right.
and come up with some great tools. You may still want to go back for more,
Yeah.
right? Because there's always great things to be done. But it isn't like you're going to step into the behavioral health cycle and you're going to spend the next 7 years sort of
Exactly.
slogging through the same things. He's looking to help really, that's just his heart and that's his approach.
Right.
And so I think I encourage people to look for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up because that's extremely valid. I was listening to another, like a psychotherapist recently talking about like suicide awareness. And it was the same thing, like getting people out of those suicidal mental patterns. I think she said it was about 6 or 7 sessions. That was all it took to get people out of those suicidal mental patterns that they were on. Yeah. And I thought that was really powerful that she said that, because if it's $80 a session, I'm just throwing out a number, 80 times 7, like that's not a crazy amount of money to put into your mental health, and then all of a sudden you're not thinking about suicide every day. I mean, that's super powerful. So it's the same thing, like you're not
life and death.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so then in this, you're not thinking about ending your marriage every day. Like all of a sudden you're getting the tools, and that's exactly what happened to us. And the way that we communicate got way better.
Mm-hmm. So good.
Yeah.
Well, should we pray? Holy Father, we just come in the mighty name of Jesus. And Lord, I'm just so grateful for every single person who took the time to listen to this. And Lord, I just ask that the Holy Spirit would just touch their hearts right now, that he would begin to lovingly just reaffirm who he is in you, the beautiful gifts you've put in each one of your children, how much you love them, and then also help lovingly correct them the way you always do, not with condemnation, but just loving guidance. And you also extend grace to us for change. So Lord, I just ask that you come into us right now, and that you would begin to change us, transform us from the inside out, to bring in your love. We just submit all of our self-centeredness. We submit that before you and ask for forgiveness. And we ask, God, that you would help us become love, to think like you do, to love like you do, to walk like you do, to speak like you do, to have your ways so that we can accurately reflect you in the earth and to our spouse and to our children. And I just lift up every really challenging marriage out there that's listening right now. And I just ask, God, that you would come in and do what you do, that a miracle would take place in their hearts, and that they would realize that it actually begins with them, not their spouse. And I pray that hearts would start to burn for you, Lord. Because when we put you first, God, everything else falls into place. And I pray that you begin to give people real, practical steps for them to take. Simple things that they can do to start walking this out in their everyday life. I pray that you'd release hope again, where hope has maybe been lost.
Yeah, God, we just break off the assignment of the enemy over any marriage that can hear my voice.
Yeah.
Any marriages that are represented listening to this at any point in time, God, that they are protected, and that any attempt of the enemy to kill, steal, destroy marriages would be silenced in the name of Jesus.
Yes.
I pray that people would be able to rise up and stand in the gap for their marriages and intercede for their families. I pray for just a new sense of passion, God, passion for you, that would just eliminate all other distractions, and anywhere that people are feeling needy, like they need this met or that met. I just thank you for just a whole new way of living, God, Christ-centered, just following after you, Lord.
Yes.
Where it has nothing to do with us anymore, but everything to do with you and what we can learn about you and following you and bringing that into our marriages. And I just thank you for it. In Jesus' name.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, make sure you share it with your friends, and also subscribe so when we do release a new episode, you will be the first to know it.
And please be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook. We also have a new Facebook group where you guys can come in and dive into conversation with us, ask us questions. So we would love to see you there as well.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you there.